And I'm really glad that all of today really is focused on the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act. So we often refer to the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act as the Common Sense Act because, as I'll discuss really, nobody seems to disagree with what the Act is about, which is making our lives better now and improving our lives for the future and future generations that live and work in Wales. So I often ask people to bring to their mind, the youngest person they know at the moment. And I always smile at this because I think of one of my friends' newborns who was born just this year, and he's called Seamus. And he's a little baby. And when you think about the future that he has ahead of him, it's a bit scary for us to think, but he will live, hopefully, way beyond the year 2100. And what's his life going to be like in Wales, in Cymru, in the future? Hopefully he'll have a healthy and happy life. Hopefully he'll be able to access green spaces in his local community. He'll have a good education, potentially a good job, maybe travel, hopefully sustainably. And yeah, what will his life look like? And I find it really helpful to sort of think about the generations that have come before us, how different Wales was, my grandparents' generation in the valleys, when it was a sort of black valleys with lots of coal mines and industry, and how different the valleys look now. And think ahead to Seamus's life and how different Wales will look by the year 2100, and what role we have as people who serve our communities here today. So I'm going to talk about our main messages of our 2025 report, which, as Vanessa introduced, looks at the progress Wales is making, how you can help. You play a really important role as people on the ground in your communities. And I had some case studies, but I understand we're hearing already today from other people who are doing some great things. So without further ado, I'll move on. This is our lovely smiling team. We're actually a smaller team than this now. Like many public sector organisations, we were hit with budget cuts a couple of years ago. So there's about 20 of us, basically, that work for the Future Generations Commissioner for Wales. And the current Future Generations Commissioner is Derek Walker. You can see him in the centre of the picture at the back there. And we exist as an organisation, basically, to champion the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act. And here's some of our kind of roles according to the legislation. We provide advice and assistance to the organisations covered by the duties of the Act. We do our best to highlight best practice. We look at the progress people are making and Wales is making towards our goals as a nation. We can undertake research into particular topics, and we can conduct reviews where we think the Act isn't being followed in the best way. And what I'm here to talk to you about mostly today is that every 5 years, the Commissioner publishes a Future Generations report. And this report is timed to come out a year before the Senedd elections. So it's a really important report to make recommendations and give the state of the nation to Welsh Government and the Senedd, but also to all of the other organisations covered by the duties of the Act. I think I'm teaching, what's the phrase? Teaching grandma how to suck eggs here in talking a little bit about the basics of the legislation. But if you're not familiar, I'd really recommend having a look online for this essentials guide. Maybe you're familiar, but your town and community council members may be less familiar. This is a really easy to access kind of essentials guide about the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act, which is 10 years old this year. And it was created to show Wales's response to the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. Really world leading. Wales was the first to legislate for sustainable development. I think the previous First Minister, Mark Drakeford, used to say that when he went abroad and talked about Wales, people asked him about rugby, about football, and about the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act. So it's obviously recognised out there, and we know of several countries that are looking to follow suit already. And you might have heard that last year, the United Nations declared that they would be creating a special envoy for future generations. So it's a really important piece of legislation. At the core of it, which I was rabbiting on about previous generations and future generations, is this idea that the decisions we make today should result in a better future. And it's not new, it comes from ancient societies such as the Iroquois philosophy, the Maori in New Zealand, who always thought 7 generations back and 7 generations ahead. At the core of the Act is the 7 wellbeing goals, which kind of respond to the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. And the idea that we're looking to that quadrant at the top there is about looking to improve environmental, social, cultural, and economic well-being for Wales. So I'll flip to the English slide. The goal's unique in that the way, for example, a prosperous Wales is described isn't what you'd necessarily associate with the word prosperity. Here it talks about fair work, it talks about decent work, a skilled and well-educated population. Yes, an economy which generates wealth, that provides employment opportunities, but in a way that's balanced with all of these other goals, in a way that makes sure that we're not compromising equality or our environment or our Welsh language, culture, our global responsibility. So organisations are asked to consider how they contribute to all of these goals. They can't pick and choose one, and they have to try and balance what they do in accordance with this. The Sustainable Development Principle of thinking to the future is set out in the Act as applying these ways of working. So long term, about considering future trends and the impact that they have on today. Integration, about thinking across all of those goals and about thinking about what maybe your neighbouring town and community council is doing, or what the local authority is doing, what the Public Services Board is doing, what the Health Board's doing. Involvement, that is pretty much as it does what it says on the tin, and that's, you know, a big role that you will all play as town and community councils. You are listening to people's views and working with your community members every day. Collaboration, again, is pretty self-explanatory, and prevention, which is easier said than done, but the idea that we're trying to act now to stop problems from getting worse in the future. This is a list of the public bodies that are covered by the Act. We're now on 56 public bodies that officially are named in the legislation. Every local authority, every health board, many national organisations, some town and community councils, and I'll come on to that in a second. But it's really powerful. You know, you can see here that it covers basically the whole of the public sector. And we know of the business sector in Wales who are really making efforts to follow the Act as well, because they see it as common sense. They know it makes consumer sense as well, that looking to act more sustainably and on environmental issues in particular. And also the voluntary sector are hugely supportive of the Act. You'll notice as well that some organisations like Police and Police and Crime Commissioner aren't named here. That's purely because they're not devolved. Again, they are working very closely with the public sector in Wales on the Act. So the Act sets out statutory guidance. So that's a picture of the statutory guidance there on the right for town and community councils. And put simply, a community council must take all reasonable steps in its area towards meeting the objectives set by the Public Services Board. So bigger town and community councils, those that earn or have an income or have earned £200,000 or more in the last 3 years, are subject legally to the Act. But I think that doesn't matter. I think, you know, it should be every town and community council, because this is your bread and butter, how you improve the well-being of people in your community. Moving swiftly on, because I'm conscious of time, to our Future Generations report. So as I said, this is our 5-year statutory report that came out in April. Well worth having a look at. I'll just note quickly that the illustrations in the report are the result of collaborations with artists in Wales. So what you see as the front cover here is a collaboration that we were supporting, you know, cultural well-being by working with artists. The report includes videos, songs, poetry, because we thought it was really important to reflect that we ourselves are trying to improve cultural well-being as well. The Future Generations Commissioner, Derek Walker, pictured here in Carramore Seaweed Farm near St David's, or in St David's really, just on the outskirts. His calls to action in this Future Generations report is that we need to stop thinking short term, addressed at, you know, everybody in Wales, but the public sector in particular, that we have to think about future generations, because not doing so will cost more money and create more problems in the long term. We need to supercharge our actions that have multiple benefits. So I'll come on to some examples of, what you can do, but when you think about greening an area in your community, for example, you are having several impacts there. You're impacting on the well-being of the people who live in the community, promoting better health, promoting better air quality. The biodiversity gains are massive. You'll see more animals, insects, and wildlife using that area. There's lots I can go into. Derek also said that we should unlock private finance more in order to meet some of the resource challenges that we have in the public sector. So particularly there, he's talking about community energy projects. We should seek to tackle poverty through fair work, and Derek's made recommendations around a real living wage, so that every organisation in Wales should be real living wage accredited. We should seek to dedicate more money towards prevention. We all know that the majority of the budget here in Wales that Welsh Government provides goes to the health sector. It's 52% now of the budget every year that Welsh Government gives to the public sector goes to health. And the majority of that budget goes to crisis services, goes to people who are very unwell in an emergency sense. We need to ensure that we're tackling those issues far more upstream. And that's where some of you come in, ensuring communities are healthy, ensuring housing is good for our health, ensuring people are doing physical activity and looking after themselves to stop that kind of crisis, growing crisis down the line. We need to protect our culture. I'll come back to rebuilding trust. We need to fund our services properly, very self-explanatory, simplify the partnership landscape that we have across Wales because it can be bureaucratic and complex. And we need to ensure that the Act is as strong as it can be. In terms of rebuilding trust, I think this is really where your organisations can play a massive part, because we've made some recommendations around involving people more closely because of the breakdown, I think, that we're seeing in the public mistrust of public services. Some call it a democratic crisis. We're seeing already polls for the Senedd elections next year showing some, different results to what we've seen before. So we are making recommendations about involving people better in our work to try and, rebuild that trust in public services, and because it leads to better outcomes for everyone. I have this short video here which kind of explains the 2025 report, which I will try and play. But can someone shout if it's either not working or you can't hear it? I'll have a go.
No sound.
No sound. Okay. I didn't think it would work properly on Zoom. Never mind. We can share that with you all afterwards because it gives a really good overview, I think, of, let me just escape YouTube and share. Really good overview, I think, of what's in the report without you having to read it all, potentially.
I think on this screen where you go to when you share, there's just a button that you click to say share audio.
Yes, so there is on Teams, isn't there? But there on this one it was saying share a window instead, and I am sharing a window, so I'm not sure I'm going wrong. But it doesn't matter. I'm short of time anyway, probably. So I'll press on and I'll put the link to the video in the chat so people can have a look at it after this meeting. So your role when it comes to the Act, these are just some of the examples that I've come up with, but you will have many more, I'm sure, of the types of things that town and community councils are responsible for and the types of things that you can think about in terms of contributing to the national wellbeing goals and to the work of the public sector in your area. So, for example, some of you will manage land for nature, parks and community gardens and orchards, and what can you do to make those as usable and biodiverse as possible? We've made a call in the Future Generations report for targets for nature, for Welsh Government to set targets for nature growth, because there isn't any at the moment in Wales. And we'd love to see us meet those targets, by 2050 for more and more biodiversity recovery. You're responsible for community assets, which, you know, is hugely important for people's well-being through their lives. And what can you do around making sure those assets are as carbon friendly as possible, use as little water as possible, generate as little waste as possible, and have community drainage, you know, which is SUDS then, what that means, that alliteration. Sorry, that acronym. You're responsible for roadside verges sometimes. So again, there's a nature link there. You do a huge amount already to celebrate local history and culture and bring people together. And that's where that kind of involvement is so important of communities. Of course, promoting a iaith Gymraeg, the Welsh language, and diversity in your area. Where possible, using local suppliers for any events or procurement that you do, and making sure that those are fair trade to contribute to a globally responsible Wales. Seeking to prevent and respond to flood events in your community, which unfortunately are getting more and more frequent. Food banks, improving health, tackling loneliness, bringing people together, creating fun. So those are some of the examples. And then the Future Generations report itself is full of good examples of what's happening across Wales at a very local level and sometimes at a national level too. So this is a quote from somebody who is involved in Gwyrddni, which is a project up in North Wales in Tawsarn, in Gwynedd, and the knowledge and support of the project, you can read this for yourself really, has made a massive difference to this person's life, and made a massive difference to the community in that area. You know, something so simple to bring people together around a community garden has really grown and has had massive benefits. So that's one of the case studies we feature. And then I've picked pretty much at random, so I hope I'm not offending anyone, some of the projects that we've come across. So Amroth Community Council and Saundersfoot Community Council, for example, have done some work around sea litter, and use the character of Bertie the sea bass to raise awareness of that, and have looked at, you know, involving the community through organised beach cleans, teaching resources, bilingual interpretation boards, supported local food and drink outlets to make sure that, you know, their products are as recyclable and environmentally friendly as possible. Gwersyll Community Council in Wrexham, looking at financing energy efficient street lighting. So that, you know, goes back to the recommendation we make about private finance and nature recovery targets and sustainability. So there's some examples there as well of what they're doing. And some of you might be familiar with the change that's been happening in Caerphilly, for example. So Caerphilly has transformed, I think, recently with this new development of the Force Caerphilly market. And that's come from a long-term visioning exercise that they did, looking ahead to 2035, looking ahead to the kind of Caerphilly that people wanted to live in, and the regeneration and the local businesses that they've involved in all of that, and the energy efficient housing that they've created as well. So this is just a slide, you know, again, I'm probably teaching grammar to suck eggs here, about what you can do. And I appreciate today's more about a cost of living crisis and about, but everything's connected, isn't it? You know, if you're looking at more energy efficient homes, you're helping the cost of living crisis. If you're looking at ways that people can spend time in their community at low cost, you're addressing the cost of living crisis. If you're looking at, you know, what we can do around local food production and gardens, you know, all of that contributes. So these are just some prompts, you know, for each of your roles, I guess. I think most importantly is talk about the Wellbeing and Future Generations Act. Make contact with your local organisations, your local public services board, and we can help with that if you don't have contacts already. And yeah, try and be a champion for change. This is a slide that I'll circulate as well. So these are some of our resources and some of our free upcoming learning and development sessions. So the ones at the top here that you see in green, they're online and they're very, you know, you're very welcome to attend those. They're really well attended. They're kind of introductions to the Act. Please share this and recommend that others attend as well. These are in person. So this is a new thing that we've set up in collaboration with other public sector organisations. The Hub Dyfodol, the Futures Hub, thinking long term, using futures techniques. If you find that difficult, as a lot of us do, our colleague runs these really good, really well attended in-person sessions, and there's a few coming up that you can see there. We have an e-learning guide that we worked on with the Open University and Welsh Government, which is accessible and free and only takes 5 minutes. So that's available to you to have a look at. And there's many more that I can share after as well, which you can see on the screen here. So diolch yn fawr. That QR code will take you to some of our resources and our website, and you can see all of our kind of social handles and our content on this page as well. I'll stop there. I feel very strange not being able to see all of your faces. I haven't presented for a while, but I hope that was helpful, and diolch yn fawr for having me today.
Thank you, Helen. That was really, really interesting, I must admit. So are you happy to take some questions? Has anybody got a question for Helen? We can
Absolutely.
put your hand up or share it in the chat and we'll... No, it doesn't look as if anybody's got any questions.
I stunned everyone to silence, but please contact me afterwards if that would be helpful.
Yeah, no, that's great. If anybody's got any questions, we can have a look. Sorry. Double check. No, that's okay. So if everybody's happy, we will move on.
I've got a question, actually. I can't bear an opportunity to ask a question going by without asking a question.
Thank you, Tom.
So a piece of work I've been doing recently has been around kind of doing a little review of different policies and statements from different public figures and politicians and so on to support community organisations to get leverage for bids for funding and support from different organisations. And one stuck out in my head that Derek made a couple of years ago now. It must have been quite early in his role there, saying about how we can have improved systems to actually monitor the progress that the public bodies have made and the objectives they're setting, and how we can better monitor the delivery of those objectives. I'm just wondering whether, because that's always seemed to be a part of the Act and the role of the Commissioner's office, that could do with being beefed up a little bit to, I suppose, introduce, whilst I fully appreciate having a big carrot to try and encourage organisations to do things, having a little bit of a stick as well.
Absolutely, Tom. I couldn't agree with you more. That's a personal view, though, not necessarily the view of the whole office. So I'm actually responsible for our work on how you monitor and assess the progress of the wellbeing objectives that are being set. And it's near impossible to do so when every organisation sets their own objectives in their own context. The Act is fantastic in that way, that it's flexible. It's a framework piece of legislation rather than a prescriptive piece of legislation. But it creates a huge challenge for understanding how, I'm just picking one off random here, how Powys Council, for example, have progressed on meeting their wellbeing objectives and steps in the last year. Organisations have to report publicly on how they're doing that. But as you'll know from reading any kind of annual report, maybe even your own, it's often very narrative and not, we said we'd do this and we've done that. It's very difficult to ascertain the progress people are making. So there's that I think a more common framework that would have to be mandated by Welsh Government, I think, in future, for setting and measuring wellbeing objectives is needed, because that would make it so much easier for us, Audit Wales, the public, to hold people to account on whether or not they are meeting what they said they do. And then there's a kind of separate conversations linked about the stick of the Act. So I mentioned the Commissioner can undertake reviews. That's our strongest power, really. And they have worked quite effectively. We've done 2 so far, and they look in depth at how organisations are implementing the Act on a particular topic or issue. So the first was about procurement, and we've seen quite a lot of change as a result of that review. So there's a new Social Partnership Procurement Act. There's a Centre for Excellence that's been set up in Wales looking at public sector procurement. We're starting to reap the benefits of that work now, and Welsh Government cultural change in that space. It'll take a while on the ground, you know, for that to come through, but I think we're moving in the right direction. Our second review was on how Welsh Government themselves are implementing the Act, and that, you know, found a lot of improvements for them to make, and they are continuing to work on that. They've got a public plan about how they're responding to all of that. So those are our strongest, like, enforcement powers. Interestingly, when you ask a lot of people who are involved in delivering the Act, which I guess many, almost all of us are, people say, oh, well, a stronger enforcement wouldn't necessarily be appropriate because this is a framework piece of legislation. It's about cultural change. And the enforcement should be in other pieces of legislation and should be aligned to the Act. So things like setting nature targets and making sure that public bodies are working towards those nature targets. And when they don't, and when they do something that's in direct contrast to that, then they could be fined or taken to court, you know, to take it to the extreme.
Thank you very much for the opportunity to come and share this. I work for Together for Change. It's a small community development organisation focusing on research, really, and very aligned with the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act. We're seeking to work with government and local authorities and other public bodies and community organisations to develop the involvement of people in decision making locally, to try and move more towards data informed or evidence-based working, and to empower and build that capacity in communities to do more for well-being on their own. So this project came about last summer, really. We applied to a tender to the local public service board to co-create asset-based wellbeing action plans in 4 Pembrokeshire communities. The project's objectives were as here. I won't read those out. I'll just click through those. So we were successful in getting the tender, and we put this opportunity out to communities. We had about 10 or 12 councils respond to that, so a fairly low proportion of the 78 in Pembrokeshire. And of those 12, probably about half of them were just sort of saying they're interested, and then after I replied to them, they didn't actually respond back. So it was a small number of applying organisations in Pembrokeshire. I was delighted to see that amongst the applications we had Crimmick and St David's. I've worked with both those organisations before, and I know Becky and Chris in various ways as well, personally and professionally. So I think there was an element of that sort of supporting our working relationship through this process. We did have 2 other councils reply as well. So we ended up with 4 councils so we had a sort of coastal council, a Welsh-speaking area up in the hills, and a couple of areas with high levels of tourism. So quite a nice range of different communities in Pembrokeshire. We had a stakeholder group which guided the project, involving lots of different public bodies and community organisations. I've been through this, I'll click through that. So, and part of the brief for the project was to co-create these action plans. So co-creation is actually a specific approach to this kind of work, which actually goes beyond co-production. Essentially, well, co-creation really is about trying to involve people really early on in the process of planning and delivering these activities. So to involve people in how we might go about engaging with the community and to help plan and structure that delivery as we move forward. We also had a capacity building element to the work. So we were able to deliver some training to town community council, councillors, staff, community members to support the delivery of the workshops that we held. I thought at this point I might bring Becky in, if you're ready, Becky, just to talk about that co-creation process in St David's. So from when I had a first meeting with you through those different meetings and events that we had, Becky, would you be able to give us a quick summary?
Yeah, that's absolutely fine. So yes, when Tom approached us and asked us, like he says, right from the beginning, how we thought we might engage with the community, because I suppose communities know their councillors might know their communities best and know how it might work. So I'd already done a lot in schools with engagement over the years. So I just said to Tom, I think we should just start with engaging the school as a way forward, because we had that kind of opportunity already lined up because of the work we were already doing. And because the project's about future generations, I thought, what better way than ask the future generations right from the start to be involved. The other thing as well was, I remember saying to somebody, oh, we're doing a project with the council and it's all about the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act. And the person just said to me, wow, what is that? And then I realised how little many people knew, just, you know, Joe Blogs in the street, that there's a big disconnection between this act and just, you know, people going about their everyday life. So that's when I thought, right, well, if we can work with the kids and the kids understand this concept, and then they bring their families to an event, then this kind of knock-on effect of the kids educating their families and the wider community. So we did think, yes, we'd have an event, but before we had the event, what were we going to do with the kids to get them engaged in the process? And I don't really know where the idea came from. It might have been something Tom had seen, but he said, oh, there's this amazing Lego that you can use to build this future city or your future place where you want to live. So Tom managed to get hold of this Lego, and we asked the school if we could go in with this Lego. And the thing is, the kids, to start with, didn't even know what we were doing, but the fact that it was Lego, they were just so excited, weren't they, Tom?
Yeah, they were totally up for it.
Yeah,
like, come in tomorrow.
Yeah, and so I don't know if, I think we must have had some in the city hall in the back room when we did an engagement event just to introduce them to it, and they were so enthralled in it. We then said we'd go back to the school and do a workshop in school. But as an engagement tool, the Lego was just a winner. And I think that's the thing. If you can find something that's very hands-on, that's an activity, it doesn't really matter about all the talking in the beginning. It's like they just got stuck in and they were starting to make things. And then as we went forward, Tom worked out a way of using the Lego to identify assets, and then you're envisioning your future community, your future place. And we just started introducing these words, assets, what are assets? So when we went into the school, we just asked them, did they know what assets were? Some of them did. We just involved the kids right from the beginning. I remember sitting on the floor and they were on chairs in a circle, and I remember just thinking, yeah, I'm not teaching them, they're kind of teaching us. I'm sitting on the floor and they're just so engaged in this, and they were all putting their hands up, coming up with really great ideas. So that's where it all started, was Lego. And then we thought we'd have an event and invite all their parents, and we talked about the Future Generations Wellbeing Act and asked them if they wanted to learn about it, do some research. I mean, they just go straight on Google and they're there on their iPads, and they're like almost creating this PowerPoint without us even, you know, asking them. They're just like doing their own research, and they love doing PowerPoints, and they get all the visuals and they get all the fancy things. And so they grasped what it was all about. And then we invited them to an event to present to their parents and the wider community, and it was fantastic. They were just brilliant. And I remember saying as well, oh, well, we've got some budget for food. And that's the other thing, right? So giving them an activity they can get stuck in and asking them if they wanted food. And then we said, what food? And they just said hot dogs. Because we had this event, the local youth club as well, were looking to fundraise. So a load of them from the youth club they said, can we do a cake bake stall? And there's a picture there of them all selling their cakes, and they use their funds that they raise to do activities or go on trips in the youth club. They were really, really engaged, and it was a fantastic event. Anyway, I'm going to stop talking now.
Thank you, Becky. That was brilliant. Sorry, my slides slightly in the wrong order, but I've been jiggling backwards and forwards. So, yeah, worked with the schools and the youth club over a period of time. A couple of months of little sessions going in. They came up with a suggestion they could introduce the first workshop. They created the poster you can see there, bottom left, which we did include in a mailing out to the community. We're trying to reach as wide a cross section of the community as we could. We did have a little bit of spare budget there, so we were able to did a mail drop to about half the houses in the community, which isn't ideal, but did reach people that perhaps wouldn't have heard otherwise. It was also on social media, of course, and just spread by word of mouth. So the young people did this brilliant presentation. I haven't included the whole thing. It's full of swooshing animations and rotating countries and really done in their style. But it did really, I think, help the audience there to get to grips with some of these concepts, which are new. They're easily understandable for people, but it was really good to hear it coming from a future generation. This is some pictures from both of the workshops there. So we also had an organisation, Pobble Moor, doing some live graphic recording and some illustration. We had the Lego. We had partner organisations who worked in those communities come along to connect and share some information on what they were up to. And we went through a range of different exercises that gave people a chance to share their lived experience of their communities, and we attempted to capture that as well as we could using flip charts and post-its and lots of other things, drawings. The young people that had come along, we had really good turnout, especially considering it was in January. It was storm warnings, freezing cold, ice up in Crimich. And so we were able to take these lived experiences and to pull them together into a community definition of what their community profile really is. And we combine that with data from easily available sources, trying to use a bit of an evidence-based approach. And through the work with the Lego, we were able to capture people's thoughts on the Crimich or St David's they'd like to see in the future. So you can see there, people were coming through with lots of very relevant issues to well-being. People were also able to write on little slips, and I'm sorry, they're not showing very well on the screen here, but it was basically saying what their idea was, and to start thinking about what assets might be useful to move forward on that. So you can see here, St David's at the bottom, they wanted what are they called? The pitch, 4G pitch or 5G pitch, I think, and a swimming pool, which swimming pool is a big community issue. And so we actually then collected these into general themes and wrote them up as sentences that were actually then able to go into tables around the 7 different sustainability goals, and people were able to dot vote to show their support for different parts of the plan suggestions. You can see there's a couple which were absolutely bombarded with votes. One of them was about the swimming pool, and one about was the loss of the doctor's surgery, which is and was and still is an ongoing conversation in St David's. And then I was able to write these up. It did take a while, and I thank Becky and Chris and the councils for their patience. I've done 4 different Canva 20-page documents in English and in Welsh, of course. Well, I'll come back to that. But yes, part of the process was looking back at previous work in the communities. So both communities had been involved in a Plan Ed project back in the early 2000s to create community action plans. Wellbeing wasn't really a term used at that point, and it's obviously before the Future Generations Act became a thing. So, Chris, I wonder if you could just give a little summary of how, going back and looking at your previous plan and thinking about a new plan, what did that provide the council an opportunity to do during the workshops?
Thanks, Tom. Hello, everyone. Shwmae pawb. So the action plans done, as Tom mentioned, in the early 2000s were actually updated then about 10 years ago. So like a reviewed action plan. So this opportunity with Tom and Together for Change is really great because it meant we could revisit, and we did, didn't we, Tom? We looked at the old plans, what people had said over 2 decades really, and how we could move forward. But within the ward, Crymych Council ward, it's a big village, but it's not like, you know, St David's. Becky, you have a city council and a full-time clerk. We just have, you know, a few hours a month clerk. So very much dependent on volunteers getting on with it. So we were able to explain that from previous action plans in the ward of Crymych, through the Future Generations Act being endorsed in 2015, put into action in 2016, one of our biggest project was a community wind turbine in the parish of Crymych, in the ward. So a 700 kilowatt wind turbine generating enough energy for 500 homes, but selling that energy to providers through the grid has allowed a project then to be sustainable. And there are now part-time staff, but 16 of them employed with that energy and environmental project. So that's a great one. Also in the ward then, the old school was bought in 2008 in Hermon within the ward. So that was a community share offer. That's now a resource centre, 2 floors, subletting to 10 tenants that employ 7 employees. So we were looking at how we can build on that, using the plans, the previous plans 10-year-old, but this new action plan through Tom now allowed us to put that into bids, to actually look at sustainable bids, meeting the Future Generations Act goals. So from the ward now, the recent SPF funding in Pembrokeshire, where we're based, we've clinched the 45,000 for Gwyl Fel Na Mai in Crymych, like a community Welsh music festival, 45,000 on the back of having this plan in place, Tom, of using all your hard work to actually show the funders that we are there doing great work, grassroots work. The pub in Crymych closed 2 years ago. That now has been bought by the football club through a share offer that raised £250,000. And then recently, another SPF project clinched 39,000 for the old chapel, Brimyrnach, in the ward, to be turned into a heritage centre, ground floor, 2-bedroom flat for local development, local housing, affordable housing, and then a pop-up cafe and a bread making oven, community oven, which is great. So all these projects have come out from people saying, doing a SWOT analysis, going to the tables at Tom met, and it's really great now. We have a great foundation of a document that will see us through for many years, and then looking at reviewing it again in 5-10 years.
So it's a useful approach in terms of the council thinking about what it's done and what it's doing. And I think both councils fed back that was a good opportunity to actually make the community aware of all the work that has actually taken place through the work of the council and other community members over that period, which doesn't always filter through to the wider population. So yeah, it also allowed us to make a summary of local people's thoughts, and we used the Wellbeing and Future Generations Act to structure that as well. As Becky mentioned, we did approach this using an asset-based approach, just getting people to think, you know, what is there in the community, the different building blocks that we could use to help achieve some of the things in the action plan. And we also had local organisations there to explain how they might be able to help support the plan. In reality, as I think Chris and Becky might both reflect at the end, you know, there wasn't enough time to do all of this work into workshops. And it very much was falling at that point to Chris and Clark in Crimmick and to Becky, particularly Chris, you didn't comment, we weren't able to complete the full kind of co-creation approach in Crimmick area because of circumstances at the time, but so we did essentially use the co-created approach that St David's had developed for both communities. But we did run through it with Chris and the Clark beforehand, and I think you felt that it would be an appropriate method for your community as well. And we did within the workshop, so we had 2 workshops in each community, one as a sort of visioning event with the Lego, capturing ideas, and the second event to try and prioritise those ideas and form them into some sort of action plan. These are the front covers of the 2 different plans that I created on Canva. It's very easy to use. It did take some time. And the draft plans that then were fed back to the councils, who gave their comments. You know, we tweaked a few inconsistencies or things that perhaps weren't quite correct. And we asked the councils to respond to say, what next? You know, how are you going to use this plan? And you can see here Crimmick's response to that: to adopt the plan as a living working document, to form working groups to continue engaging with the community, and to maintain and develop the register of assets, and how people can get involved, and also contact details for all those different organisations. I think perhaps I'll go back to that one and just briefly overall, Becky and Chris, whether you could sort of summarise what the action plan has given you and where you think it's going to go next, but quite briefly, if you could. Chris, do you want to go first?
Yeah, diolch yn fawr. So I think I touched on it just now that it will be used as a living document. We will add more assets. We've just launched a community land trust for local housing, some land becoming available, working with the Housing Association, Barcid. So that's going to be quite important. So local housing, local jobs, Welsh language, and recreational activities for people to live, work and play in a vibrant modern community is what we want for future generations as well.
Lovely, thank you.
Yeah, I'd just echo that. It's a living document and we will use it to do our ongoing engagement events and keep adapting it and adding to it, and yeah, use it going forward. So it's fantastic.
So you did actually create an engagement working group off the back of this, Becky?
Yeah, so we never had an engagement working group at all on the City Council. We didn't have any kind of strategy or anything. So it's kind of like the basis for forming a strategy now of how we work with the community and looking at what works and holding different events. So it's fantastic, yeah. It's the start of better working practice with the community, better co-creation, yeah.
Brilliant, thank you both. So as well as the actual action plans themselves, which have both been produced in English and in Welsh, and the Word versions are there for councils to use, you know, they can pull bits out of it and use it for creating resources in future events and so on. We did evaluate the whole event, the whole project, sorry, and the final report summarises the learning from that, which is quite extensive, both for the way that we deliver the project, but also how the PSB and other organisations could learn from this approach. It was funded through the PSB, and the information that we've gleaned on the approach is being fed back and will hopefully guide their decision making as we move towards the next wellbeing assessment and planning part of the cycle. We also had an external evaluation done to really try and underscore that and make sure that the learning was very robust. And these documents are going to be available. They'll be going up on the Together for Change website very soon. But overall, I thought I'd just feedback on what we learned. So it really did emphasize the importance of well-being and living well in the communities, and the usefulness of the structure of the Future Generations Act in doing that. Brilliant community councils to work with. We didn't go into the fact, so the two other councils that were engaged in the process basically felt that the time scale, so this was all done between really in the communities October, and originally it was meant to be the end of December. You can imagine trying to fit all this in before Christmas. Fortunately, it was extended till the end of January for the practical activity and February for the report writing. So they took the decision not to engage and take the project forward. But feedback from those councils mentions that it was still a useful exercise, and it has got them thinking more about creating another action plan at a slightly better time. Overall, we met the project's aims, but the feedback really did highlight areas for improvement. So the importance of time needing for building understanding of the project, trust between different stakeholders, and also in managing volunteers, essentially. And we must remember that town councillors don't get paid for this, and very often a great deal falls on a small number of shoulders. Members of the public participated very willingly, especially in the interactive workshops, and fed back that they valued the council's work and that they understand more about what they do and the achievements. Young people were particularly enthusiastic and added value. We could have done more, I think. For example, at the beginning of the project, I didn't come and do a presentation to the full council in both communities, and I think doing that would have underpinned wider understanding of what we were doing and possibly supported other councillors to take more of an active role. The time of year as well was very significant. We were trying to deliver some of the training starting, I think, on January the 3rd. And obviously it's a very busy time, difficult to get people to training sessions. We know that this face-to-face approach proved valuable, and it was really good to help those councils reflect on the progress they're making in their communities by looking back at those action plans, which they probably wouldn't have done otherwise. Maybe. Nod, Chris and Becky, would you have looked back at those action plans? No, probably not. But really that, more resource for further evaluation would be really helpful to actually explore how PSBs and other organisations can do this better. I'm not going to read all this out, but this was the findings of the external evaluation, which overall backed up what we found out in the main project reports. Time constraints, limited resources, varying levels of participation in the communities. Asset-based approach worked really well. It's quite a sort of Lego style blocks, building blocks approach that I think people can understand. But yes, the real challenge was around the commissioning of the project at the time of year that took place. It would be much better done, perhaps starting the whole process in the new year, I think was mentioned, or possibly maybe starting at about this time of year, allowing you to do activities and engagement over the summer, avoiding some of the challenges of dark, cold Welsh winter evenings. And it came up with some future recommendations. And the project generated some big bits of artwork for both communities to use for whatever purpose they want. There's some nice images there of community buildings and so on. So hopefully they'll be of use as an asset to those councils in the future. A lot of talk about the importance of collaboration and of co-production and engagement. A recognition that it is often a few members of the council or members of staff, if you're lucky in some councils to have that, driving things forward. the fact that seeing results from things actually can motivate others. So that's perhaps an approach that could be helpful, to start with the low-hanging fruit, but maybe always to link it back to this strategic approach linked to well-being, and maybe using the Future Generations Act as a structure to help you talk about that, you know, to compartmentalize things a little bit and make it easier to understand. That seeing things like this, highlighting best practice, is very useful. So working together, the One Voice Wales area committees do that. It was mentioned that people perhaps don't really know how to do engagement, don't have the confidence, resources we talked about, but you don't necessarily need lots of money. I think a lot of engagement actually comes down to listening, personally. What people need is a damn good listening to. So even if you don't have budget for events and so on, then that could be helpful. There was a feeling that better resourced larger councils potentially find this easier because they have access maybe to more resources and assets. I mentioned that this is a new role for town and community councils, and that the civic calendar very often, particularly in maybe larger councils, mayors and chains and carol concerts and all of these things, has been a traditional focus, and maybe the shift towards more of a modern approach would be helpful. But also even Becky sort of seemed to have a little revelatory moment there, that she could maybe use the civic calendar for other purposes. What did you think, Beck?
It's just that I always thought the focus seemed to be on a lot of these events where we're there for show, and it was just, think about it as that network chance to have these conversations, which, yeah, but also to, like you say, listening and maybe getting some feedback, maybe taking a pin board and allowing people to write things. And traditionally, you wouldn't have done something like that as an engagement thing at a civic event, but why not? Why not flip things upside down a bit and try something new, and maybe use all those things that you have to go to as an opportunity for the community to, you know, have a pin board with little post-its. Yeah, we've never done anything like that. We hold engagement events, but actually every event is an opportunity for engagement. So yeah, that's one thing that I had a bit of a revelation with.